In this gameplay example with my opponent selecting the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul, I decided to let him get the region of Central Oeste by selecting the territory of Tocantins, so I would potentially be able to capture and hold the North region having only one non-capital border to guard. And the territory selection went well for me. I was able to put my troops into one big army into the capital territory, so with that army not being cut off from any of the opponent's territories of North, my opponent couldn't have added his troops anywhere in the corner to prevent me from capturing it, or crush any of my troops. What my opponent did in his turn is captured the region of Sul, properly guarding the border, and then in the fortification phase, he fortified his 15 troops army away from my region into the furthest from me place, so I wouldn't potentially consider crushing these troops. But with him leaving his capital with only 12 troops, I realized that it would probably just be the most ideal to immediately try taking over his capital, as it wasn't expected for me to lose a lot of troops at all, and I didn't. And with me having enough troops left, I decided to capture the 6 troops region. My opponent got lucky to recapture his capital, losing only 1 troop more when he only had 35% chance to successfully blitz that capital. And then with that, I'm not sure why he moved all of his troops out from his capital instead of strengthening it, as it led me to put a lot of troops into it once again, and with that my opponent quit. In these blizzards set up with me going first, I decided to pick the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul, as not only because it's usually the best territory, but also with a blizzard being in the territory of Santa Catarina, it gave me an opportunity to capture and hold the Sul region with only one non-capital border to guard. And my opponent went with the territory of Guez. I decided to select both of these territories, so my opponent couldn't place his capital in any of them, preventing me from getting the region of Sul. At the end of the territory selection, my opponent forced me to select this territory, so I couldn't immediately hold the region of Sul, that he would be able to immediately invade it in his first turn before getting blocked. And this is what my opponent did, though I'm not sure why he did this manual roll here, as with capitals having 1 extra die, the rolls are supposed to be disadvantageous for attackers. In my turn I captured the region of Sul, leaving 7 troops on its border, and then invaded my opponent into his region. And then don't even ask me why I fortified these 8 troops into the blocked territory in the region of Sul, as it was totally dumb for sure, and to be honest I didn't even notice that the entire game. Anyway, then my opponent I think tried to potentially guard his captured region, but with me having 100% chance to break through it, I obviously did. So in the next turn my opponent tried to manual roll the non-capital border of Sul. Though he wasn't successful, and with that he decided to capture a bunch of territories, not really sure why, but maybe he wanted to increase his territorial troop bonus, or maybe was potentially expecting that I accidentally forget to invade one of his captured regions. But neither of these things have happened. So my opponent, trading an ace set at 3 cards, decided to start manual rolling my capital army, but these rolls weren't successful for him at all. In these blizzards setup I had to select between the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul for the common Sul region strategy, or the territory of Mato Grosso to potentially try holding the 6 troop region. And I decided to go with the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul, though I'm not sure which territory of these would have been better. But I think maybe the territory of Mato Grosso would have been better, as for the region of Sul there are still 2 non-capital borders, and the Sul region itself gives 3 troops, while if selecting the territory of Mato Grosso, the potential would have been to hold the 6 troop region having only 1 non-capital border to guard. Anyway, what was really bad is that it was very easy for me to cut off my way from the other border of the North region, and with the territory selection actually this is what happened. And I wasn't sure where my opponent was going to put his secondary army, so I decided to do the troop split to be able to cover both of the potential places. But obviously I should have expected for my opponent to mostly care about getting and guarding the 6 troop region. So that was unfortunate for me to not add that many troops into the 6 troop region, with my capital army being blocked from it. So what I think it would have been the best in this setup for me to do is to add all of my troops to that territory over here. I would have crushed the blue player's army, and then leaving some troops here, would have fortified the rest to my capital. But since that didn't happen, I had to think of something on what to do to minimize the chances of my opponent to successfully capture and hold the 6-troop region. So first of all I added 6 troops over here, so my opponent would weaken his capital, and then after capturing these regions over here to make the blue player waste more troops as well, I started to manual roll his non-capital army. It was obviously smaller, but the rolls were supposed to favor me as attacker, so while with me not being able to take his army down, that army would potentially become weaker in general. My opponent in his turn mostly strengthened his non-capital army, and then with his capital army crushed my 6 troops, and then after getting a very good blitz roll to crush my non-capital army, he continued moving forward to invade me into my regions while before leaving 6 troops on the non-capital border. Then I believe it was possible that he didn't mean to press fortify, as he said oops, and with me holding the Seoul region, it led me of getting 3 extra troops. And then since believing that my opponent fortified his troops from this territory over his non-capital border, I decided rather not to risk the blitz roll, and straightly take the capital blitz roll which was 100%. My opponent failed to recapture one of the capitals, and with that he quit the game. In these blizzards example I decided to go with the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul, while my opponent with the territory with Espirito Santo, which was an unexpected capital's choice for me. Though that I realized he will probably try doing, is trying to take over the Nordest region trying to properly guard it. In my turn I captured these regions which my opponent invaded all of them. So I recaptured them again, putting some troops on the Seoul region border, but unfortunately the blue player break through it only losing 1 troop in 6 versus 4 attack. Then the same situation continued happening in the next turns, with my opponent being able to invade in all of the upcoming turns. So then I decided to give up on recapturing the Seoul region, as besides not being able to hold it, another reason which I was concerned is to not leaving my capital too weak. But with that my opponent captured the Nordest region trying to guard both of the non-capital borders, and to invade him, that would have been 51% with a 6 versus 5 blitz roll, so I decided to rather check out how strong is his capital, as if his capital is weak, then it might be even worth to immediately blitz him, and 18 versus 10 would have been 58%, so I decided to wait for one more turn and see what he does. And luckily for me, he didn't strengthen his capital much, and then with me trading an A set I've got even 99% chance to blitz his capital, which with me doing manual rolls with my 3 troops army near, became even 100%. In this game with a blizzard being on the territory of Sao Paulo, I didn't really know what territory would have been the best for me to select after my opponent selecting Mato Grosso do Sul. But the territory which I decided to pick was Rio de Janeiro. It is because I would always be accessible to invade my opponent into the region of Seoul. And then that my capital army would always get unleashed no matter which border he would invade me from, so unless he would be fine of me getting 4 extra troops. And with the deployment reveal, this is how setup looked. Both of us decided to split our troops into 2 different armies. But my opponent instead of choosing his capital on the territory of Mato Grosso do Sul, selected it on the territory of Minas Gerais, and with that I started to think that maybe it would have actually been a good territory for me to select also, over Rio de Janeiro, but not sure. All in all I really liked that my opponent selected his capital there, as with that I knew that he couldn't capture something and hold. At least not until he crushes my secondary army. So I paid a lot of attention on strengthening it. In our turns we were just mostly capturing one territory in order to get a card. My opponent was blocked from my secondary army, so he couldn't crush it, and while I could have tried crushing his secondary army, if doing so, I would have unleashed his capital army, and then with my capital army still staying blocked, I would have been in a terrible situation. So I just continued putting my troops on my secondary army, and my opponent did the same. But the thing was that my secondary army was accessible towards the blue player's capital, meaning that eventually I would have gotten a good chance to blitz my opponent's capital, and if failing with it, I would have been able to try it again with my capital army. While my opponent's secondary army wasn't accessible towards my capital army, meaning that he doesn't have that potential opportunity like I do, and his secondary army much or less doesn't serve a good purpose for him. But then my opponent decided to capture the region of Central Ost, making my biggest army the way to blitz his secondary army without unleashing his capital army, and this is what I, along with trading an A set at 3 cards, did, getting a very fortunate blitz roll of losing even 8 troops fewer. And with that it gave me enough troops to properly hard the Seoul region. My opponent failed to invade it, so then he fortified some troops out from his capital, which I ended up crushing. My opponent then started manual rolling my army, but he wasn't successful at all,